Do you find love, or does love find you? In movies, TV shows, and other fictional media, the latter phenomenon tends to occur more often than the former. This is rather unsurprising since events follow a predetermined script where nothing occurs randomly. For example, particular characters with polar opposite personalities end up falling in love by the conclusion. Furthermore, in fictional media, even if it's based on a true story, everything is ostensibly easier for the characters because the plot dictates that stressors and obstacles will be overcome no matter what. If scenes don't proceed according to plan, then the director will cut the scene and start from the beginning. The process is repeated until everything is performed correctly according to the script. This phenomenon is comparable to respawning in a video game, where even if your character dies or fails in some manner, there are essentially unlimited opportunities to rewind the events and do everything over again until you get it right. Unlike movies, TV shows, and video games, reality is much different because for the most part there are no do-overs. We're unable to rewind events and we're unable to respawn after failing or dying. We have to get things right the first time, or hope that in cases where we fail, the consequences aren't too severe and we can return from them relatively unscathed. In the case of love, and relationships born from it, there's added pressure to get things right, to ensure circumstances proceed as perfectly as possible despite our imperfect reality. Do you find love, or does love find you? Today's discussion investigates this question by analyzing the enigmatic nature of love and its impact on forming intimate relationships. Sometimes love occurs organically between two people without much effort or hindrance, similar to Hollywood movies. However, most of the time love tends to require conscious and deliberate effort to ascertain. You have to put yourself out there, so to speak, and there are also notable challenges that'll hinder its manifestation if they aren't accounted for. Even so, love isn't necessarily a rigid dichotomy, whether it arises organically, with considerable effort, or perhaps a little bit of both. What's evident is that love's long-term preservation does require deliberate effort, and its success is no accident. Finding love is one aspect, but making it last well into the future is a completely different ballgame. To begin, how do we define love? Referring once again to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, love is defined in multiple ways, but I'll narrow the focus to a few interpretations. Love is defined as, quote, strong affection for another arising out of kinship or personal ties, attraction based on sexual desire, affection and tenderness felt by lovers, warm attachment, enthusiasm, or devotion, end quote. As these definitions reveal, love is a feeling or sentiment of fondness for another person, place, or idea. Love isn't passive, rather it's active because it serves as the catalyst for compassionate, empathetic, and tender actions towards others. With a key term defined, now let's get to the main discussion. The first half of today's topic remarks, do you find love? In other words, is it necessary for you to take an active role in finding a significant other and building a relationship that lasts well into the future? The answer is evidently yes, because anything worth obtaining doesn't come easy. Before any relationship can begin, both parties must take some initiative. Nevertheless, even before this stage, you have to put yourself out there. What does this imply? Essentially, you must leave your abode and attend social functions, or go to places where you're likely to interact with others. It's highly improbable that you'll be able to create and much less maintain a meaningful relationship without leaving your residence. Even in today's digital age, interacting with someone online only goes so far since it's not a complete substitute for in-person interaction. Indeed, the paradoxical phenomenon of increasing loneliness despite our advanced digital communications technology is a topic I discussed in another video. Anyhow, my point is that there's merit to action being required on your part in order to obtain anything of value. Love is no different. Recalling my experience, there's one event or series of events with a particular person that continually drives this notion home, the notion that you must act in order to acquire what you're seeking, or in the very least, enable the potential for its acquisition. This story begins in elementary school, when I didn't fully understand what love meant. During those days, I primarily focused on having fun and I enjoyed not having to worry about heavier burdens that would arrive later, no different than any other kid. Despite all that, a fellow classmate gradually captured my attention as I grew older. Essentially, I developed a significant crush on her that lasted from elementary school to roughly the first half of high school. While we were still classmates in elementary school, I tried to spend as much time with her as possible, and this naturally served to augment my feelings for her. For the most part, I kept these feelings to myself and I never revealed them directly to her, largely due to fear of rejection. I can recall a specific moment where I intended to ask her out, and a viable opportunity presented itself in grade 6, but as you can likely guess, I failed to act on it. Ultimately, my inaction cost me because after grade 6, she switched schools and I didn't see her in person again until grade 10. Even then, it was only one occasion since she attended a different high school at that point. When I reflect on this experience, it still haunts me even though I've essentially moved on from it. I can't help but wonder about the possibilities had I acted differently. I realize that the result may have been the same regardless, with nothing transpiring between us, but then again it could have gone the other way as well. To some extent, I've always regretted not taking the initiative back then, and this experience continues to affect my perspective. My previous inaction influenced my decision to do things differently in high school and into the present. I've learned that risks are necessary to obtain desirable outcomes, and rejection isn't the end of the world because you can come back from it. You'll always be left wondering what could have been if you never take the initiative, like I do every time I reflect on the above-mentioned experience. With all that said, there's a catch. If you try too hard to obtain love and build a relationship, then you'll appear desperate. The nice guy phenomenon, or simping, evidently comes to mind, a topic I've also discussed in another video. Anyhow, it's one matter to satisfy the necessity for action in order to facilitate potential, but it's another matter to try and force something to happen when there's clearly no potential. For example, if you're romantically interested in someone and they don't reciprocate your advances, then there's no point in pressing further. I learned that the hard way through another experience which I've mentioned before. Trying to convince or make someone love you when they clearly have no interest is a road you'd rather avoid. Have some self-respect and walk away. You'll thank yourself later. To summarize this section, you have to put yourself out there, but you also can't take it to the extreme. This evidently requires patience and trust, which segues well into the next section. The second half of today's topic remarks, does love find you? For some people, this is exactly what happens. They essentially find love even though they weren't actively looking for it. For example, two coworkers from different backgrounds end up falling in love after prolonged and continuous interaction. Or two strangers meet at a social function and after a few years we see that they've started a family together. In these cases, people often remark the stars aligned. They were destined to end up together, and/or they're soulmates. Indeed, it appears that if one link in the sequential chain was broken, then it's possible that they wouldn't have ended up together. These remarks enter into the realms of fate, determinism, and stoicism. If everything is determined, then there's nothing we can do to change outcomes, and what's meant to occur is meant to occur, whether you like it or not. You likely won't have a problem with this fact if you're successful in the game of life, but you certainly will have a problem with it if you receive the metaphorical short end of the stick. Regardless of outcome, many of us still take issue with a deterministic model because we would like to believe that we can change things, especially when circumstances aren't proceeding well. In terms of love, if it hasn't worked out thus far and we're still looking, we certainly hope that our luck will change and eventually everything will work out. Perhaps some elements are deterministic, or they follow a sequential chain of events that produces a positive or negative outcome. In cases where people find love that lasts for decades, the chain produced something positive, but in cases where this didn't occur, then the opposite is true. Such is the nature of life. Despite the order we've constructed, chaos and randomness persist. We can't account for everything, and this certainly applies to love and relationships. Two distinct individuals with unique desires, interests, and ambitions are never going to fully align. People who manage to stay together find a way to constructively balance their competing ambitions and desires. This entails give and take, or compromising, and focusing on the long term by aligning mutual interests. Even in cases where love seems to arise more or less organically, work is still required for its long-term preservation. Once something is found, it can easily slip through your fingers if you aren't cognizant. To conclude, do you find love, or does love find you? The answer I've uncovered through reflection is that it's a bit of both. Love must be found in the sense that conscious effort is required on your part to obtain it. Someone has to take the initiative in order for a relationship to even begin, and after that, there must be reciprocity for the relationship to last. At the same time, trying too hard and forcing the issue will backfire. In this way, love also tends to find you. You can't operate on the assumption that you'll possibly meet your soulmate at every social function you attend. Doing so screams desperation, and it'll leave you disappointed when it doesn't occur. Instead, while you may have the desire for love, there must be patience and trust. Trust that opportunities will present themselves if you put yourself out there. The catch is that it's up to you to seize them, and you'll never know if you don't try. I must admit that I used to take the active part a little too seriously by thinking about love on a frequent basis. However, as soon as I let that notion go, that was when something tangible occurred. My significant other and I recently passed 2 years together, and our relationship is something I'm immensely grateful for. When we met, I had no expectations as to what would transpire between us, which was different from how I previously operated. The result was something totally unexpected, but welcomed and far better than I could have imagined. In my case, what transpired was a bit of both. I had to take action by going to the event where we met, but love also seemed to have found me since I didn't expect to find it there. The same is true for her. She had to take action to attend the event, and love seemed to have found her as well, since she didn't expect it either. Love can be found, but in some respect there has to be an organic component as well. Forcing the issue won't work, and so there must be a balance between taking the initiative and allowing circumstances to proceed naturally. Seek and ye shall find, but also remember that a degree of patience is required to find what you're seeking. Thank you for taking the time to watch. If you enjoyed today's video, please consider subscribing.